At 5:55 Zulu, a Cessna 172 takes off from Newcastle Airport in KwaZulu-Natal. At 8.3 nautical miles northwest of Newcastle Airport, the pilot begins to lose control. Find out what happens next on this episode of Lesotho's Pride. On Sunday the 14th of September 2014, a pilot and his passenger began a visual flight rules cross-country flight from Rand Airport in Gauteng. Now, visual flight rules means a pilot's main reference is to look outside of the cockpit versus to look inside at the instruments. The pilot was a 24-year-old male. He held a private pilot license that he had achieved on the 23rd of September 2013. And within the same month, he had achieved his night rating. And so, interestingly, he had received his license almost 1 year to the date of his accident. Last but not least, his last total recorded amount of hours were 58. And so the purpose of his trip was to build hours towards his commercial pilot license. To get your commercial pilot license, you need 100 hours of pilot in command time as one of its requirements. His route was as follows: to depart Rand Airport, head southeast towards Virginia Airport in Durban, and to make a stop at Newcastle on the way. Now, there was no mention if it was a technical stop, meaning for the most part a fuel stop. But the following day he would route back to Rand Airport with a planned stop at Newcastle. And in this instance, it was a technical stop where he uplifted with fuel. The aircraft was a Cessna 172 Skyhawk registered under Zulu Sierra India Foxtrot Kilo. It was manufactured back in 1970. It had a gross weight of 2,454 pounds, an empty weight of 1,622 pounds, a service ceiling of 13,500 feet, which is interesting because the average service ceiling for Cessna 172 is 14,000 feet. And at the time of the accident, the aircraft had about 14,019.28 total airframe hours. And it was operated under Part 141, which is an aviation training organization. The flight from Rand Airport to Virginia Airport proceeded uneventfully. Virginia is an excellent general aviation airport in Durban. A lot of student pilots utilize this airport as their hour building destination, including myself when I was doing my hour building. Check out my trip to Virginia here. The next day at 1:19 Zulu in the afternoon, India Foxtrot Kilo took off from Virginia Airport heading for Newcastle. It is unknown what time he had landed, but the fuel attendant noted she had arrived at 4:50 Zulu and uplifted 800 Rand of avgas, which equated to 41 liters. At 5:55 Zulu in the evening, the pilot took off. And at 6:05 Zulu, the aircraft was spotted by Air Traffic Services surveillance radar. This was at 5,000 feet above mean sea level, which is about 400 feet above aerodrome level. At this point, the air traffic controller noticed that the aircraft initiated a right turn. The aircraft's rate of descent and speed increased and eventually disappeared from radar. Air Traffic Services at OR Tambo tried to establish contact with India Foxtrot Kilo, but to no avail. The Aeronautical Rescue Coordination Center was informed, of whom the Newcastle Police as well as emergency services were activated to search for the aircraft. The wreckage was found on a privately owned farm about 8.3 nautical miles northwest of Newcastle Airport. It was destroyed by a post-impact fuel-fed fire. Both the pilot and the passenger were flung out of India Foxtrot Kilo and were fatally injured. It was found that the farmer was the only witness, having heard the aircraft fly low and then heard a loud bang. So what caused this crash? Well, what do we know thus far? According to the weather report, the temperature was 32 degrees Celsius with a dew point of -3 degrees Celsius. The wind was about 7 knots. With that temperature dew point spread, the chances of rain were very slim. There was some mid-level cloud cover in the vicinity, but none that would act as a significant factor. According to the post-wreckage analysis, the aircraft was under power upon impact. There was no other indication that there was a system, structural, or engine failure. and so aircraft factors were ruled out. The only conclusion the inspectors could derive was based upon the evidence from radar services, the time of day, the location of the accident, the point of departure or the airport of departure, and last but not least, the aircraft's flight phase. The pilot was taken off at night from an airport which has very little visual cues. Takeoff is one of the most important critical phases of flight, and at night it is very important to pay attention to your instruments, especially up to 500 feet above ground level, and for a VFR flight. Why? Because you are flying slow, you're close to the ground, and you're more prone to a spall and then eventually a spin. And if you enter a spin while you're so close to the ground, it is a lot more difficult to recover from it. It is thus believed that the pilot may have been spatially disorientated, thus leading him to enter a spin or a spiral dive and crashing with high impact energy forces. So for you as a private pilot or a student commercial pilot, what are the key lessons here? Lesson number 1, remember your basic training. When conducting a turn, ensure that it is coordinated, and especially at night, monitor your instruments. Even if it is VFR, because your reference to the horizon isn't as clear at night as it is during the day. If your turn is not coordinated and you're not paying attention to your instruments, what are the further effects of aileron and rudder control that you've learned in your PPL training? That the further effect is a spiral dive. And what's the effect of a stall during a turn? Consequently, a spin, and the fact that he may have been about 500 feet above ground level, it was insufficient altitude for him to recover. So conclusively, pay attention to your instruments at night and make sure that you're doing a coordinated turn. Lesson number 2. You learn this during your human performances exam, both at the PPL level and at the CPL level. Spatial disorientation. This can happen to any pilot regardless of their flying experience, and you are particularly prone to it when you are fatigued, distracted, doing highly demanding mental tasks, or have poor visual conditions, such as flying at night or in bad weather, or if you're in instrument meteorological conditions, where there is no reference to a horizon. Now, we have learned of 3 main types of spatial disorientation that can be applicable to this crash. The leans, of which you have a false perception of the horizon, illusion of turning in the opposite direction, and last but not least, the Coriolis illusion, of which occurs when you make an abrupt head movement, such as reaching down to collect your pen or talking to your passenger. This leads to a tumbling sensation. The leans and the illusion of a turn can both, in particular, lead to what is called a graveyard spin or graveyard spiral, basically entering a spin or spiral dive. So the important point here is, at night, pay particular attention to your instruments. Ignore the sensations that are fed from your ears, and remember, don't make any sudden head movements. Last but not least, lesson number 3. If you are flying VFR at night, remember to fly when there is a moon. The 15th of September 2014 had about a quarter of a moon. It was unknown whether it was sufficient light for the pilot to see the horizon, both from the moon and with lights on the ground. However, it is always better to fly with the moon at night than without. Okay, thanks guys for watching. If you haven't, remember to subscribe and become part of the community as we grow our channel to 1,000 subscribers by December 2022. Remember to like this video. The more people like this video, the more the YouTube algorithm exposes the video to people who need to see it. Cheers, and we'll see you next time.